The deepest heartbreak is not being rejected. It is discovering your worth only after someone else has already seen it. The great hall of Blackwood Castle shimmered beneath hundreds of crystal lanterns as snow drifted quietly beyond the towering windows, covering the kingdom in a blanket of silver. Nobles, elders, commanders, and representatives from every allied pack filled the chamber, their voices fading into silence as Alpha King Damian Ashford stepped onto the ancient stone platform where generations of rulers had chosen the partners who would stand beside them. Olivia Carter stood among the invited Omegas wearing a simple ivory gown that her late mother had carefully sewn years before. Unlike the elaborate dresses surrounding her, hers carried no jewels, no embroidered family crest, and no symbol of noble ancestry. She knew exactly what everyone saw when they looked at her. An ordinary Omega from a forgotten village with no influential family standing behind her. Even so, she had not come searching for a crown. She had come carrying a quiet hope that kindness might matter as much as bloodline. Damian's calm silver eyes moved across the gathered faces before finally resting upon Olivia. For one fragile heartbeat, the entire room seemed to disappear. Olivia felt her heart race as though destiny itself had paused to take a single breath. Then the Alpha King spoke with the steady voice expected of every ruler. He thanked her for her loyalty to the kingdom, acknowledged her honesty, and gently explained that the future Queen of Blackwood needed a lineage capable of strengthening ancient alliances among the great packs. His words remained respectful, yet every sentence settled heavily upon Olivia's heart. No accusation had been made. No insult had been spoken, yet the meaning could not have been clearer. She was not enough. Quiet whispers spread through the hall, while sympathetic eyes followed her. Olivia lowered her gaze only long enough to steady her breathing. She refused to let tears become the final memory anyone carried of her. With graceful hands, she unclasped the small silver token offered during the ceremony, walked toward the stone steps beneath the throne, and carefully placed it there. The tiny piece of polished metal rested silently against centuries of carved marble. It felt less like surrender and more like closing a chapter that had never truly begun. Without speaking another word, she turned and walked toward the massive castle doors. Every measured step echoed softly through the hall. Some nobles watched with curiosity, others with quiet relief, but none noticed the tall man standing near the western columns whose expression never left Olivia for even a moment. Ethan Brooks, commander of the Royal Scouts and Damian's oldest friend, had witnessed countless ceremonies inside the castle. None had unsettled him the way this one did. He remembered seeing Olivia only once before during a harvest festival months earlier. While noble guests celebrated inside warm tents, she had quietly stayed outside helping elderly villagers carry baskets through heavy rain without asking anyone for recognition. She had smiled with the same gentle warmth she carried now despite the pain hidden behind her composed expression. As Olivia stepped beyond the castle gates, cold winter air rushed across her face. She paused only once at the top of the long stone staircase overlooking the sleeping kingdom below. Snowflakes landed softly upon her hair before melting almost instantly. She drew a slow breath, not to hold back sorrow, but to make room for something stronger than disappointment. If one path had closed before her, then she would build another with her own hands. Behind her, the great doors opened quietly. Ethan emerged into the falling snow, fastening his dark winter cloak against the wind. He looked toward the lonely figure descending the endless staircase and made a decision that would change far more than either of them could possibly imagine. Without calling her name or asking permission, he simply began walking after her, while deep inside the castle, unnoticed by everyone celebrating the ceremony, an old wooden chest hidden beneath forgotten royal records shifted slightly, as though a secret buried for generations had quietly awakened. The stone steps stretched endlessly beneath Olivia's feet as the castle slowly disappeared behind her beneath the gentle curtain of falling snow. She did not hurry. Every careful step gave her another moment to leave behind the hopes she had carried for far too long. The winter air stung her cheeks, yet the quiet ache inside her heart felt heavier than the cold. She remembered her mother's gentle voice from years earlier. Never measure your worth by the doors that close. The right path will always recognize who you truly are. At the time, those words had sounded like simple comfort offered to a lonely child. Today they became the only strength she had left. Behind her, steady footsteps echoed across the stone staircase. Olivia paused and turned just enough to see Ethan Brooks approaching through the softly falling snow. His dark cloak moved gently in the mountain breeze, and unlike the curious stares inside the great hall, his expression carried neither pity nor judgment. He stopped several feet away, giving her the respect of choosing her own space. "I hope I am not disturbing your walk," he said quietly. Olivia managed a small smile. "You are not." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt unexpectedly peaceful. Ethan looked toward the snow-covered valley stretching below the castle walls before speaking again. "There is a small village near Pine Hollow where I often stop while returning from patrol. The people there always need extra hands during the winter. I thought." He hesitated, searching for words that did not sound like sympathy. "I thought you might appreciate a place where no one knows what happened today." Olivia looked at him with quiet surprise. "You do not even know me." Ethan smiled gently. "I know enough." She tilted her head slightly. "What do you know?" He answered without hesitation. "Months ago during the Harvest Festival, while everyone celebrated inside the banquet hall, I watched you spend nearly 3 hours helping an elderly couple repair the wheel of their wagon in the rain. You believed no one noticed. I did." Olivia lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the memory. "Anyone would have helped them." Ethan slowly shook his head. "Many people walked past them. You stopped." His words carried no admiration meant to impress her. They sounded like simple truth. Something inside Olivia relaxed for the first time since leaving the ceremony. They continued walking together down the mountain road, speaking only when conversation came naturally. Ethan never asked about the rejection. Olivia never mentioned it. Instead, they spoke about ordinary things. The quiet forest surrounding Pine Hollow. The old stone bridge that froze every winter. The wildflowers that covered the valley each spring. By the time the castle towers had disappeared completely behind the snow-covered hills, Olivia realized several miles had passed without the heaviness she expected to carry. As evening approached, they reached the small village nestled beside a winding river. Smoke drifted peacefully from cottage chimneys while children laughed as they built snow lanterns along the narrow streets. The villagers greeted Ethan warmly before welcoming Olivia with genuine kindness that expected nothing in return. An elderly woman offered hot soup without asking questions. A carpenter insisted on repairing the loose buckle on Olivia's travel bag before she even noticed it had broken. The warmth of strangers felt almost unreal after the quiet disappointment she had left behind. That night, Ethan led her to a modest cottage standing at the edge of the forest. "You may stay here as long as you wish," he said. "It belonged to my grandmother. She always believed empty homes should become places of healing." Olivia stepped inside. Dust rested lightly upon the wooden shelves, but the fireplace, handmade quilts, and old rocking chairs still carried traces of gentle care. As she quietly opened the window to let fresh winter air drift inside, her eyes settled upon a weathered wooden chest tucked beneath the staircase. It looked ordinary except for one detail. Carved into the lid was the same unfamiliar symbol she had seen only once before on the tiny pendant her mother had asked her never to lose. And for the first time in many years, Olivia felt that the answers she had never known she was searching for might already be waiting inside this quiet little home. Olivia knelt beside the weathered wooden chest, as pale morning light filtered through the frosted windows of the quiet cottage. Dust shimmered gently in the golden beams, while the crackling fireplace filled the room with comforting warmth. She reached into the pocket of her simple ivory dress and removed the small pendant her mother had insisted she keep close since childhood. The carved symbol on its surface matched the marking engraved into the lid of the chest with astonishing precision. Her fingers hesitated above the old lock. Countless times she had wondered why her mother guarded the pendant so carefully, always smiling sadly whenever Olivia asked where it came from. "One day it will answer questions you have not learned to ask yet," she had whispered many years before. At the time, Olivia believed they were only comforting words. Now they echoed through the silent room with unexpected meaning. As she gently pressed the pendant against the carved symbol, a quiet click broke the stillness. The ancient lock released without resistance. Olivia slowly lifted the lid. Inside rested a carefully folded wool blanket, a beautifully carved wooden box, several yellowed letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon, and a detailed map, drawn across worn parchment. Everything had been preserved with remarkable care, as though someone had prepared the chest for this exact moment. She carefully opened the wooden box first. Nestled inside lay an elegant silver medallion unlike anything she had ever seen. Around its edge stretched delicate carvings of wolves standing beneath a crescent moon, while the center displayed the same mysterious emblem appearing on her pendant. Beneath the medallion rested a sealed letter addressed simply to my beloved daughter. Olivia felt her heart race as she carefully unfolded the fragile paper. The handwriting belonged unmistakably to her mother. Every graceful line brought back memories of quiet evenings spent together beside a small fireplace in their old village home. The letter spoke not of sorrow, but of hope. Her mother explained that their family had protected an ancient promise for generations, choosing ordinary lives over noble titles because preserving peace mattered more than preserving status. She wrote that Olivia descended from a forgotten bloodline whose history had nearly vanished after years of political conflict. The medallion and the map were never meant to grant privilege. They were meant to guide the final descendant toward the truth when the time was right. Olivia read every sentence twice, scarcely believing the words before her. A gentle knock sounded at the cottage door. Ethan stepped inside carrying a basket of fresh bread and warm tea prepared by the villagers. He immediately noticed the open chest and the emotion shining in Olivia's eyes. "Did you find something important?" he asked softly. Olivia handed him the letter without speaking. Ethan read it carefully, his expression growing more thoughtful with every line. When he finished, he looked at the ancient map spread across the table. One location had been marked with a silver circle deep within Blackwood Forest. "The sanctuary of the first oath," he read quietly. "I have heard old travelers mention it, but everyone believed it disappeared centuries ago." Olivia carefully traced the marked location with her fingertip. "My mother wanted me to find this place." Ethan nodded without hesitation. "Then we will find it together." There was no excitement in his voice about hidden bloodlines or forgotten history. There was only steady confidence in the woman standing before him. Olivia noticed that simple difference immediately. Ethan had not looked at her differently after reading the letter. He had not suddenly treated her as someone more important than yesterday. He still saw the same person who had walked beside him through falling snow after leaving the castle behind. As the morning sun climbed above the pine trees outside the cottage, Olivia folded her mother's letter with quiet care and placed it beside the ancient medallion. She did not yet understand why her family had hidden such remarkable secrets for so many years, but somewhere beyond the peaceful forest, an ancient sanctuary was waiting, and with it perhaps the truth that would change not only her own future, but the future of the entire kingdom. The journey toward the ancient sanctuary began before sunrise beneath a sky painted with pale shades of blue and silver. Frost clung to every pine branch, while a gentle winter breeze carried the scent of cedar through the quiet forest. Olivia carefully wrapped her mother's letter, the ancient map, and the silver medallion inside a small leather satchel before stepping outside the cottage. Ethan had already prepared 2 horses, along with enough food and blankets for several days of travel. He greeted her with the same calm smile he had offered since the day they first left the castle together. Nothing in his expression suggested that the discoveries inside the old chest had changed the way he saw her. That quiet consistency eased a fear Olivia had not even realized she carried. As they followed the narrow trail leading deeper into Blackwood Forest, towering trees gradually blocked the morning sunlight until only scattered rays reached the snow-covered ground. The map guided them toward places where no ordinary roads existed. Ancient stone markers slowly appeared between the roots of enormous trees, each carved with the same crescent wolf symbol engraved upon Olivia's pendant and the silver medallion. She gently brushed away the snow covering one weathered pillar and traced the familiar carving with her fingertips. "My mother knew this place was real," she whispered. Ethan dismounted beside her and studied the ancient stone with quiet curiosity. "These markers are older than the kingdom itself," he said softly. "I have crossed these forests for years, yet I never noticed them." Olivia smiled faintly. Perhaps they were never meant to be found until now. They continued climbing through the peaceful wilderness until the forest suddenly opened into a secluded valley surrounded by towering cliffs. At its center stood an enormous circular sanctuary built from pale gray stone that seemed untouched by time. Ivy climbed gracefully across the ancient walls while crystal-clear water flowed quietly around the foundation like a protective ring. Snow had melted from the stone entrance despite the lingering winter cold, revealing beautifully carved wolves standing beneath a crescent moon. Olivia felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through the pendant resting against her heart. As she stepped toward the entrance, the silver medallion inside her satchel began reflecting soft rays of light that shimmered across the weathered carvings without blinding brightness or unnatural force. The ancient symbols simply appeared clearer than before, as though welcoming someone long expected. Ethan watched in silent amazement before turning toward Olivia. "I do not think this place recognizes power," he said thoughtfully. "I think it recognizes memory." Olivia slowly nodded. Together, they entered the sanctuary where sunlight poured through an opening high above the circular chamber, illuminating a beautifully carved stone altar resting at its center. Around the walls stretched murals depicting generations of guardians standing beside the earliest alpha leaders, united not by rank but by trust. Olivia approached the altar with quiet reverence and gently placed the silver medallion upon its smooth surface. Nothing dramatic happened. Instead, a hidden compartment slowly opened beneath the stone, revealing a carefully preserved scroll sealed with the same ancient emblem. Olivia unfolded it with trembling hands while Ethan stood respectfully beside her. The first lines explained that her family had never ruled kingdoms or sought royal authority. Their responsibility had always been to preserve the sacred covenant that united every pack whenever division threatened the land. Her forgotten bloodline had been chosen not because it was superior, but because each generation promised to protect peace before pride. As Olivia continued reading, she understood that the greatest inheritance her mother had left behind was never the medallion itself. It was the responsibility to remind future leaders that strength without compassion could never preserve lasting unity. At that same moment, far away inside Blackwood Castle, Alpha King Damien quietly studied newly uncovered royal records that described the very same forgotten covenant. And for the first time since the ceremony, he realized that the woman he had allowed to walk away carried a history far older and far more important than anyone inside the kingdom had ever imagined. The quiet sanctuary remained filled with gentle morning light long after Olivia finished reading the ancient scroll. She carefully rolled the parchment closed before placing it beside the silver medallion upon the stone altar. Nothing about the discovery made her feel more important than she had been the day before. Instead, she felt humbled by the realization that every generation before her had quietly chosen service over recognition. Ethan watched her with the same calm respect that had never changed from the moment they first met. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. Olivia smiled with thoughtful honesty. "Relieved. I spent so many years wondering who I was supposed to become. Now I think my mother hoped I would simply become the person she raised me to be." Ethan nodded. Then she succeeded. They remained inside the sanctuary for another hour, carefully studying the carved murals surrounding the circular chamber. Each image told the same story in a different season. Ancient guardians stood beside the earliest alpha leaders during times of peace, famine, rebuilding, and celebration. No throne appeared larger than the people gathered around it. No ruler stood alone. Every carving reminded future generations that leadership survived only when trust stood beside power. Olivia quietly touched one weathered carving of a young guardian offering water to a tired traveler. "The greatest moments are always the smallest ones," she whispered. Ethan smiled. Perhaps that is why history forgets them so easily. Before leaving, Olivia gently returned the scroll to its hidden chamber exactly as she had found it. The sanctuary had preserved its promise for centuries without asking for praise. She believed it deserved the same respect today. Together they stepped back into the fresh mountain air where the first signs of spring had begun to soften the snow across the valley. Tiny streams flowed between the ancient stones, carrying clear water through patches of green moss emerging beneath the melting ice. As they began the journey home, neither realized that events inside Blackwood Castle had already begun changing. Deep within the royal archives, Damien Ashford sat beside the oldest historian in the kingdom, surrounded by shelves filled with forgotten records. After hours of comparing faded journals, ceremonial ledgers, and family histories, the elderly scholar finally placed a weathered book upon the table. "Your Majesty," he said quietly. "These accounts describe the Covenant Guardians. Their descendants disappeared from public record generations ago after choosing to protect unity without accepting political authority." Damien carefully examined an illustration inside the fragile pages. Around the Guardian's neck rested a silver medallion identical to the one Olivia had discovered inside the wooden chest. His heart grew unexpectedly heavy. He remembered every respectful word he had spoken during the ceremony. Yet for the first time, he understood that kindness alone could still cause deep pain when guided by incomplete understanding. He had judged Olivia according to noble lineage while never asking who she truly was. The realization lingered long after the historian left the room. Damien quietly walked onto the castle balcony overlooking the awakening kingdom. Below him, villages prepared for spring, while distant forests shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. He did not regret refusing a political alliance. He regretted believing that ancestry recorded in public books revealed the full value of a person. Far beyond the castle walls, Olivia and Ethan continued riding peacefully through the forest, laughing softly as birds returned to the trees after winter. Ethan noticed her smile had become lighter than when they first left the palace, and seeing that quiet happiness mattered far more to him than any forgotten bloodline ever could. Neither of them realized that the road ahead would soon bring them face to face with the Alpha King once again, not beneath the weight of rejection, but beneath the far greater weight of truth. Several days later, the first blossoms of early spring began appearing along the forest paths as Olivia and Ethan returned from the ancient sanctuary, carrying little more than the memories, the silver medallion, and the renewed purpose they had discovered together. The journey back felt lighter than the one that had brought them there. Olivia no longer searched for proof that she mattered. She had found something far greater than recognition. She had found peace with the truth her mother had protected throughout her life. Every conversation between her and Ethan flowed naturally, filled with quiet laughter, stories from childhood, and simple dreams for the future. Ethan never asked whether she regretted leaving the castle. He understood that some questions no longer needed answers. As they reached the gentle hills overlooking Pine Hollow, a small group of royal riders appeared on the distant road. Their banners moved peacefully in the spring breeze rather than announcing danger. At their head rode Alpha King Damien Ashford wearing his familiar dark cloak, though there was something noticeably different in his expression. The certainty that had once surrounded him had been replaced by quiet reflection. Olivia slowed her horse while Ethan instinctively guided his own beside hers, not as a shield, but as a steady companion. Damien dismounted before either of them spoke. He approached with measured steps and respectfully lowered his head. The silence between them lasted several moments before he finally spoke. "I have spent many days studying the forgotten history of this kingdom," he said calmly. "During that time, I discovered that the greatest mistake I made was not refusing a political match. My mistake was believing that records and titles revealed the complete measure of a person's worth." Olivia listened without interrupting. There was no bitterness in her eyes, only quiet curiosity. Damien continued with complete honesty. "When you stood before me in the Great Hall, I saw only the alliances that could strengthen a kingdom. I failed to see the compassion, courage, and quiet strength that already stood before me. For that failure, I am sincerely sorry." The gentle wind carried the fragrance of blooming wildflowers across the hillside, while birds sang among the nearby trees. Olivia looked toward the valley before returning her gaze to Damien. "Thank you for telling me the truth," she answered softly. "Your words mean more because they come from understanding rather than obligation." Damien nodded gratefully, accepting her response without expecting anything further. His eyes briefly rested upon the silver medallion hanging around Olivia's neck. "The historians confirmed your family's place in our earliest covenant," he said. "The kingdom owes your ancestors a debt that history almost forgot." Olivia gently touched the medallion before smiling. "My mother believed that true honor was never meant to separate people. It was meant to remind them to care for one another." Ethan quietly looked toward Damien and spoke with respectful sincerity. She believed that long before either of us knew anything about her family's history. Damien met his friend's eyes and understood exactly what those words meant. Ethan had chosen to walk beside Olivia when the world believed she was ordinary. Nothing discovered afterward had changed the reason he remained there. A warm smile slowly appeared across Damien's face, not from happiness about what he had lost, but from gratitude that someone worthy had been recognized by the right heart at the right time. As the three of them stood together beneath the clear spring sky, the distance created by misunderstanding quietly disappeared, leaving behind something far more enduring than regret. It was mutual respect, hard-earned wisdom, and the beginning of a future where every choice would be guided not by appearances or ancestry alone, but by the character revealed through kindness, courage, and unwavering compassion. The invitation from Blackwood Castle arrived 3 mornings later, carried by a royal messenger whose respectful manner surprised every villager gathered around the small square in Pine Hollow. Rather than delivering a command, he bowed politely before Olivia and presented a sealed parchment bearing the silver crest of the kingdom. Alpha King Damien Ashford had called for a public gathering where the Forgotten Covenant and the newly discovered royal records would be shared with every allied pack. Olivia quietly accepted the invitation without excitement or fear. She had spent too many years allowing uncertainty to guide her heart. Now she simply wished the truth to stand on its own. Ethan smiled gently as they prepared for the journey. "Whatever happens today," he said while fastening the saddle on his horse, "remember that you do not need anyone's approval to become the person you already are." Olivia looked at him with grateful eyes. "Thank you for reminding me when I almost forgot." The castle looked different when they returned beneath the bright spring sky. Days earlier, its towering walls had seemed distant and overwhelming. Now sunlight reflected warmly across the stone towers, while flowering vines climbed along the outer gardens. Villagers, elders, commanders, historians, and representatives from every allied pack filled the great courtyard, their conversations filled with curiosity rather than judgment. As Olivia and Ethan entered together, many people recognized the silver medallion resting around her neck. Quiet whispers spread through the gathering, but they carried admiration instead of doubt. Damien stood upon the ceremonial platform beside the oldest members of the royal council. When Olivia approached, he stepped down from the platform instead of waiting for her to stand below him. The simple gesture immediately silenced the crowd. "Today," Damien said clearly enough for every person to hear, "we correct a mistake that history allowed to remain hidden for generations." He invited the chief royal historian forward, who carefully opened an ancient leather-bound record preserved inside the royal archives. The elderly scholar explained how the Covenant Guardians had quietly preserved unity among the earliest wolf packs, choosing lives of service over wealth or political influence. Their names gradually disappeared from official records because their purpose was to protect peace without seeking recognition. Finally, the historian turned toward Olivia. "The surviving documents confirm beyond doubt that she is the final living descendant of that honored bloodline." A respectful silence settled across the courtyard. No dramatic celebration followed. Instead, people slowly lowered their heads in acknowledgement of a legacy they had nearly forgotten. Olivia felt emotion rise quietly inside her, not because she had gained a title, but because her mother's lifelong sacrifice had finally been understood. Damien looked toward the assembled kingdom once more. "Many believed greatness belonged only to powerful families," he continued. "Today we are reminded that the greatest strength often grows unnoticed in ordinary homes where kindness is practiced every day." Olivia stepped forward with calm confidence. "My family protected this promise because they believed every life deserved equal dignity," she said gently. "If their history is remembered again, I hope it encourages every child, every Omega, every Alpha, and every family to believe that compassion remains stronger than pride." Warm applause gradually filled the courtyard, not because of noble blood, but because her words reflected the values people wished to pass to future generations. Ethan remained quietly beside her, offering no speeches and asking for no attention. His steady presence alone revealed the choice he had already made long before anyone discovered the truth about Olivia's ancestry. Damien watched them together with genuine peace in his heart. He understood that leadership sometimes meant accepting difficult lessons with humility. As golden afternoon light spread across the castle courtyard and spring blossoms drifted gently through the air, Olivia realized that the greatest gift her hidden bloodline had given her was never status or recognition. It had simply led her toward people who valued her heart long before they ever learned the story written within her family's forgotten history. The days following the gathering transformed Blackwood Kingdom in quiet but remarkable ways. Conversations once filled with assumptions about noble birth gradually shifted towards stories of kindness, courage, and service. Throughout the villages, parents shared the rediscovered history of the Covenant Guardians with their children, reminding them that the strongest foundations of any kingdom were built by ordinary people who chose compassion every day. Olivia returned to Pine Hollow with Ethan, grateful that the attention surrounding her family had finally begun to settle. She spent her mornings helping neighbors plant new gardens after the long winter and her afternoons teaching young children how to care for medicinal herbs, just as her mother had taught her many years before. Life felt peaceful again, and that simple peace became more valuable than any title she could have imagined. Ethan often worked beside her without speaking very much. They repaired fences, delivered food to elderly families, and laughed together over small mistakes that turned ordinary days into treasured memories. Olivia noticed that Ethan never tried to impress her with grand promises or dramatic declarations. Instead, he showed his heart through steady actions that never changed whether anyone was watching or not. One warm afternoon, they walked together beside the gently flowing river beyond the village. Wildflowers covered the grassy banks while birds circled above the sparkling water. Ethan stopped beneath a large oak tree whose branches had begun filling with fresh green leaves. He looked toward the peaceful valley before speaking. "When I first followed you down those castle steps, I believed I was simply making certain you did not have to face disappointment alone," he admitted quietly. "Somewhere along the journey, I realized that walking beside you had become the place where I most wanted to be." Olivia smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the golden afternoon light. "You never asked me to become someone different," she answered. "You believed in me before either of us knew anything about forgotten bloodlines or ancient promises. That is something I will always remember." Ethan nodded gently, "because none of those discoveries ever changed who you already were." Before either of them could continue, the sound of approaching horses echoed along the nearby road. Damien arrived alone, wearing simple traveling clothes instead of ceremonial robes. He greeted them with a warm smile that carried none of the distance once expected of a king. "I hope I am not interrupting," he said kindly. Olivia shook her head. "You are always welcome." Damien looked around the peaceful village where families worked together preparing for the annual spring festival. "I came because the Royal Council has approved a new tradition," he explained. "Each year the kingdom will celebrate a day of the Covenant, honoring not only rulers, but every person whose quiet acts of kindness strengthen our people." Olivia lowered her eyes with humble gratitude. "My mother would have loved that." Damien smiled. "I believe she would have reminded us that the celebration belongs to everyone." The three of them walked together through the village, speaking not as rivals or strangers, but as friends who had each learned something valuable through unexpected circumstances. As evening approached, lanterns began glowing along the village paths while musicians prepared for the coming festival. Children laughed as they hung flower garlands across wooden fences, and neighbors shared homemade meals beneath the soft colors of the setting sun. Olivia realized that happiness had arrived so quietly she had almost missed the moment it entered her life. It had not come through recognition or ancient history. It had grown one gentle choice at a time, surrounded by people who saw her true worth long before the world finally understood it. As the first stars appeared above Blackwood Kingdom, Olivia looked toward Ethan standing beside her with quiet confidence, and she knew that the future waiting before them had never depended upon hidden bloodlines. It had always depended upon hearts willing to choose one another with honesty, kindness, and unwavering trust. The first day of the Covenant arrived beneath a brilliant spring sky as every village, every allied pack, and every family gathered within the wide meadow below Blackwood Castle. Silver banners moved gracefully in the warm breeze while flowering trees surrounded the celebration with blossoms that drifted gently across the fields. Musicians filled the air with joyful melodies, children carried woven garlands of wildflowers, and long wooden tables overflowed with bread, fruit, and fresh harvests shared freely among neighbors. There were no grand displays of power. Instead, The entire kingdom celebrated the quiet acts of kindness that had held its people together through generations. Olivia stood near the old oak tree overlooking the meadow, wearing the same simple ivory dress she had chosen since the beginning of her journey. The ancient silver medallion rested around her neck, not as a symbol of superiority, but as a reminder of the promise her family had protected for centuries. Ethan walked beside her with the same calm confidence that had never changed from the day he first followed her down the castle steps. He looked toward the smiling families filling the meadow and quietly said, "This feels exactly the way your mother hoped the future would look." Olivia smiled warmly. A future where people remember one another before they remember titles. Nearby, Damian Ashford welcomed representatives from every allied pack, greeting each guest with genuine warmth rather than distant ceremony. The lessons of the past had quietly transformed the way he led his kingdom. He no longer measured strength only through alliances or ancient names. He looked first for compassion, honesty, and service, knowing those qualities created the strongest foundation any kingdom could possess. As the afternoon sun reached its highest point, Damian invited Olivia and Ethan to stand beside him before the gathered crowd. Silence gradually settled across the meadow as he raised the restored records of the Covenant Guardians for everyone to see. "Today," he said with steady conviction, "we remember that history is not shaped only by kings or councils. It is shaped by ordinary people whose daily kindness protects the hearts of those around them." He turned toward Olivia with sincere respect. "Your family preserved this truth in silence for generations. Because of your courage, it will never be forgotten again." Olivia accepted his words with quiet humility before looking across the thousands of faces gathered before her. "My mother taught me that every choice becomes part of someone else's future," she said gently. "If we choose kindness today, those who come after us will inherit hope instead of fear. That is the greatest legacy any family can leave behind." Warm applause spread naturally across the meadow as people smiled through grateful tears, recognizing their own families within her simple message. Ethan quietly reached for Olivia's hand, not to draw attention, but because the journey that had begun with heartbreak had become one they now shared together. Olivia looked at him and realized that love had entered her life without promises of crowns, wealth, or recognition. It had arrived through quiet loyalty, patient understanding, and countless ordinary moments that gradually became extraordinary. As golden evening light settled across Blackwood Kingdom, lanterns illuminated the meadow while children laughed beneath flowering branches and neighbors embraced one another like extended family. Damian watched the celebration with peaceful satisfaction, grateful that the kingdom had gained something far greater than an ancient bloodline. It had rediscovered the values that gave every generation purpose. Olivia looked toward the horizon where the sun slowly disappeared behind the distant mountains, remembering the lonely walk she had taken away from the castle only weeks before. At the time she believed rejection had marked the end of her story. Now she understood it had quietly opened the first page of the life she had always been meant to live, proving that true destiny does not begin when someone chooses you. It begins when you finally recognize the value that has always lived within your own heart.